It is Wednesday, June 10th, 7:04 p.m. This is the Plan Commission of the City of Evanston. I am Jim Ford. We do have a quorum, so I will call the meeting to order. You have the agenda. Are there any changes or additions to the agenda? Hearing none, the agenda will stand. On the minutes of May 13th, are there any comments?
I have one minor typo to point out.
Okay.
On page 3 of 4, it's the weapons cod in the fourth paragraph. It should be code.
Oh, yes. Well, I would go a little bit farther down on that page and note the reference to Chairman Lewis as having, no, it says chairman in my copy. Does it say commissioner in yours?
Commissioner. Oh, it does say Commissioner Lewis, Chairman Lewis.
Yeah. I think we want to fix that.
Yeah.
Okay. Under the call to order and declaration, it seems to me we should note that we introduced 2 new commissioners. That's all I've got. Anything else? If not, a motion to approve the minutes as corrected.
Motion to approve the minutes is connected.
Lewis, second.
Second?
Goddard, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the minutes stand approved. Okay, we have one item of business before us. We're in public hearing mode on this, aren't we? Okay. This is case number 15 PLND 0080, a proposed zoning ordinance text amendment to allow second floor additions as minor variations. In this case, this came to us on aldermanic reference, so the staff are the petitioners. So Demir will make the presentation. We have with us Matt Rogers, who is the chair of the Zoning Board of Appeals, who I assume you wish to speak. So I think what we'll do is let Demir go ahead and make his presentation, ask Matt for his comments, and then we can do questioning on both. I'm assuming that no other public are going to show up. Ready to go?
Yes.
Go.
Thank you, Chairman Ford. So the only case tonight in front of you is the zoning ordinance text amendment to allow second floor addition variances to be a minor variance instead of a major variance to non-conforming structures. So as Chairman Ford mentioned, this came as an aldermanic reference that I think initially was brought up at the Zoning Board of Appeals by one of the members. So then through the alderman, it was referenced to staff to investigate the possibility that the second floor additions to existing non-conforming structures be not processed as major variances that have to go through the Zoning Board of Appeals. So staff was instructed to kind of look at possibilities of how to modify that. So our ability to modify that is relatively limited. Currently, if somebody's requesting a setback variation, that it's a variation. We cannot do, unless we change a code, it's got to be processed as a variation. However, the city does differentiate between minor and major variances. So a minor variance is any sort of bulk restriction and requirement that can be varied up to 35% of the requirement. So what that means is that if you have a 5-foot side yard setback requirement and the code allows you to process that as a minor variance up to 35% of the variation, that's 1.75 feet, which means 5 feet minus 1.75, you'd have to meet the minimum 3.25 side yard setback for that to be processed as a minor variance. Interestingly enough, the code does specify that for second floor additions to existing structures, that side yard setback can be processed as a minor variance up to a 3-foot setback. So the process is done administratively. The cost is 250 feet. Administratively, it means that it's not going to the Zoning Board of Appeals, but that the zoning administrator makes the decision. The timeline is typically 4 to 6 weeks. We do have to notify the property owners within 250 feet of the property. We have to, once we get the full application and we notify it to the neighbors, we wait 10 business days per ordinance to get any feedback, any comments from the neighbors. And then thereafter, the staff gets together and evaluates the standards for this, for the proposal, and then the decision is rendered. And then the same property owners that were notified initially are notified of the decision of the zoning administrator. The appeal process is to the Zoning Board of Appeals. It can be done either by the applicant if the request is denied, or by any of the surrounding property owners, or actually anybody. So these are the standards. I'm not going to go into details, but there's 5 of them, and it boils down to that it's the proposed variance is not going to have a significant impact on the surrounding properties and the adjacent property values. And that the last one, the 5th one, is one it's pretty significant, that the proposed variation is the least deviation necessary for the project. So those are the couple variations that are strictly scrutinized when we review that internally. And obviously, if there's any comments from the surrounding property owners, those are also invaluable, and we definitely consider those. So the other process is the major variance process. Those do go to the Zoning Board of Appeals, and that's basically any other variance that's not a minor variance or a fence and family necessity variation. The code actually lists the types of bulk restrictions that you can get a variance for. But in general, anything that's not a minor variance, that's what it is. So for an example, if you have a 5-yard setback requirement, you can get a major variation to have that setback reduced to a foot or 2 feet. Anything less than 3.25, that is the maximum by the minor variance. There are some bulk restrictions related to parking and the overall height when it exceeds 50 feet. Those types of requests do have to go through the City Council, and the Zoning Board of Appeals provides a recommendation to the City Council. But all other ones are determined by the Zoning Board of Appeals. And then the appeal is to the Circuit Court after that. The fee is $350, and the timeline is usually about 6 to 8 weeks, because we do have notice requirements part of the zoning ordinance. We not only have to notify the surrounding property owners within 500 feet in this case, but also we have to publish that in the newspaper, and then the city also does the email blast, and we post that on our website. And then the standards, there are 2 more standards. They're a little bit different than the standards for the minor variance. These do deal with particular hardship and physical hardship on the property. There's also a standard in regarding to the sort of the monetary extraction that one can get based on the variance, and that's also considered as part of the by the ZBA. And then the alleged difficulty cannot be created by the property owner. So when we looked at the potential changes to the current process for these second floor additions to the non-conforming structures, a non-conforming structure is a structure that does not meet bulk restrictions, so it doesn't meet the side yard setback or something like that. And it's usually a 1-story building, and if somebody wants to add a second floor, that's what we're talking about. So when we looked at this, the only thing that made sense without changing the requirements for setbacks, et cetera, was to actually switch that type of project for second floor addition on the non-conforming structure to basically switch that to a minor variance process. And currently, the code that I believe was amended in 2009 allowed these second floor additions to have a 3-foot setback rather than this 35% variation. And so this proposal essentially would eliminate that, and it would allow the second floor addition to be processed as a minor variance regardless of that setback. So the one other thing that I'll point out, and this is basically, this slide shows exactly what's in the proposed ordinance that will be inserted into this part of the code. It talks about that the suggestion is to not allow second floor additions over the permitted yard obstructions, such as front porches, bay windows, et cetera, which are permitted to sort of get into the required yard closer than what's typically allowed. And our reasoning for that is that we do not want to see second floor additions over these things that are allowed to be closer than typical structure. And in particular for the front porches, It's important for the character of the neighborhood to have a front porch and not allow a second floor to be added above that or above the front porch that is then significantly closer to the front property line than your typical 27-foot setback for any other residences. So we felt that was important to include that in there. And that really, in essence, is the proposal, to basically just allow the second floor additions to be processed as minor variances regardless of what the setback of the underlying first floor is. We do believe that this is an appropriate process for this, given the fact that the ZBA has pretty much approved every single one of these requests. In most of these circumstances, the existing property owner did not create his own hardship, and so they're looking to improve the property that may be substandard, does not meet the lifestyle of current residents, and there's a need for the second floor. And the fact that they have to go through this process for something that it is most of the time, if not all the time, approved, it seems appropriate that it's processed in a little bit of a shorter time through minor variance process. They still need to meet the standards of approval. They're a little bit different, but in general, it's very similar. The neighbors are still notified. They have the opportunity to comment. Their feedback, as I mentioned, is strongly considered when any of these requests come in front of us. And as I mentioned, the second floor additions over yard obstructions would not be allowed in this proposal. And here's an example of one of those projects that were recently reviewed by the Zoning Board of Appeals. This was not in your packet. It's for a property at 825 Asbury. This was a one-story house that the property owner, I think it was a new property owner, that wanted to do a second floor addition. The existing house, as you can see, it has a 1.8-foot side yard setback. And so the proposal to add a second floor within the same footprint had to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals. And then so here's the existing, or the proposed first floor plan with the front porch over here, the dining area, kitchen, and the living room, and then this L-shaped is a deck in rear. And then here's the second floor, basically in line with the first floor. This is the chimney and above the dining room, and it does not extend over the front porch. Here are the front and rear elevations. This is the front portion that was, I believe, enclosed, the front porch, and then the second floor that's sort of in the back. And then in the rear, this is the L-shaped deck, and this is kind of what the house looked like from the rear. And then on the sides, this is the front elevation. So if you can imagine, the existing home kind of was one story basically in this line, and then the property owner just added the second floor.
Let me just for a minute ask a question. Are you sure it is the Planning Commission that you want to be at rather than, what's the other meeting?
I do not know.
For the Art Center, the Harvey Clark,
I believe, is there?
That's probably 2402. I'm not sure what the meeting is, but there's another meeting at 2402 down the corridor at the other end of the building.
okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
However,
Appreciate it.
You're certainly welcome to stay if this interests you.
it does
We'll be
interest
back.
us. We might be back. You never know.
With a variance.
Thank you.
That's okay. So just to go over the standards for approval of text amendments to the zoning ordinance, there are 4 standards. The first one in regards to the consistency with the comprehensive plan, we do believe that this is consistent. The plan calls for changes that recognize the need for these neighborhoods to be upgraded as long as they maintain the character of the existing neighborhoods. And we believe that this type of text amendment that allows for these additions to existing housing stock that has seen better days is consistent with the comprehensive plan. In regards to the second standard, we do believe that standard is satisfied. We do not believe that this would have a negative impact on the existing character of the neighborhood, of single-family residential neighborhood. We believe that homes with 2 floors are more in character than one-story additions. We believe that those types of improvements should be encouraged, and property owners would go through the process. It's a little bit less costly and timely on the applicant. And then standard number 3, we believe it's satisfied. We do not believe this would have any adverse effect on the property owners. We say that without knowing what the existing or proposed setbacks would be in each one of these circumstances, but in essence, it would apply across the city, and there are standards to be evaluated. The neighbors would be contacted, so the notice requirement would still be there. And if there is opposition from the property owners in the area, then we would, that's strongly considered, and it would play into the decision factor of the staff. And then finally, the adequacy of public facilities and services, that this one is not necessarily applicable to this one, but usually for all the building permits, the plans are reviewed by all departments for proper water, sewer, sanitary facilities. So with that, staff recommends positive recommendation to the city council. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer at this time.
Let's hear from Matt Rogers first, and then do questions, then this may help. Mr. Chairman, welcome.
Thank you. Do you want to swear me in, or do you take me at my word?
I'll swear you promise to tell the truth in this hearing.
I do, thank you. Again, my name is Matt Rogers. I'm chairman of the Zoning Board of Appeals, and this particular text amendment was generated originally from the Zoning Board of Appeals. We hear these types of cases on a fairly regular basis. As Demir had mentioned, we approve almost every one of them. Quite often we find properties that are sitting shifted off to one side, so there's a side yard setback of maybe 2 feet on one side and 10 feet on the other side. People come to us. This particular one was just a recent one, and you can see how much space there is between the house and the neighboring property. The reason we often approve these types of things is because we feel that it is a little unfair to ask someone to shift the weight bearing of a second floor 2 feet in from an existing wall. And quite often that's the amount of space we're talking about. So rather than allowing them to build by right or anything like that on that wall, the suggestion was made to make it a minor variation. So there still is some control by the city over any type of construction that's going on these second floors, but to sort of alleviate some of the burden from the property owners, as well as to alleviate some of the burden on the Zoning Board of Appeals from always hearing these cases that we almost always approve. So we had, when this case came through, actually was when we had suggested we had talked with Melissa Klotz, and one of our members then spoke with Alderman Miller, who is the one who referred it on to you. But this does come with the ZBA's full support and hopefully your support of ZBA.
Thank you. Questions for Matt? I guess the question is provoked by something you said. I suppose either one of you could answer this. If I'm in a house which has non-conforming setbacks, but I propose to build a second floor for which the setbacks would be conforming, that is to say, I've set it in, that I can do by right?
That's correct.
Yes. So you can actually, if you have a 3-yard setback and you need a 5-yard, you can actually shift the weight of that second floor off of the outside wall in 2 feet and build by right. The city has no problem with that.
It's a structural problem, but
Exactly.
not a legal problem.
Exactly. So what we do when we look at these is we look at them from the structural aspect of feeling that it is unfair to ask a property owner to figure out how to shift weight for a second story back in over their property when the weight could be borne down to grade on a first floor.
So when you talk about this standard, the practical difficulty is not self-created. That's the practical difficulty.
Well, the practical difficulty is they did not, number one, position their house on the lot, so they have no control over what their current existing side yards are, as well as looking at the hardship of it being how do they build the structure in such a way that it is safe. It gives them sort of what they are looking for without impeding on a neighboring property. but also makes it as easy for them as possible, because quite often the homes that we're seeing that want to have a second-story addition come on substandard lots where there really isn't any place to build an addition out behind or anything like this. So depending upon the individual type of property, this one in particular also would have needed us to approve for them because the house was added onto several times. The original structure, I think, dated from the 1860s, if I remember correctly. And there were steps down where the house got gradually lower at the back, so ceilings went down as you came through. And so even if they had wanted to just level out the ceiling on the first floor and not build a second story, they would have had to have come to us in order to get that variation granted.
Commissioner Lewis.
So this is truly for not, I mean, some people might have caused this. It's just for anyone whose house was situated before this current setback ordinance.
That's typically what we're seeing.
But
Is
yeah, I know
it's on
there's
homes.
land changes,
Right.
but-
I mean,
but it's just-
you know, our current zoning ordinance, 1993, I think was when it was
Yeah.
originally drafted. And of course, lots of the homes that we see in Evanston predate that. And we see homes like this, which are a smaller home that isn't really usable by a family today. It was ideal in 1860 when it was built and added on to in the 1880s. But for a family today, it really just is not very useful. And that's typically the type of homes that we see coming for this.
Okay, so if you're conforming, this is not to allow people to become non-conforming.
Correct.
If it was built to a 5-foot setback, there was a 5-foot setback. If you want to build something to 3 feet, you still have to go for.
Exactly. If you wanted to build something that hung over the existing wall, you still would have to get a major variation. This also would not cover if you were wanting to extend a wall backwards. If your second story was going to be 20 square feet larger and you wanted to expand the footprint of your building, that's not the intention of this either. It has to be on the existing wall as it stands today.
I have a question about the extensions. I understand not building over a front porch. But let's say it looks as though, well, let's say that you have a bay window and that the bay window, the main line of the structure is non-conforming and that the bay window then juts out from that. When you put on the second floor under this proposed revision, can you mimic that bay in the second floor or must you step back from it?
You would be required, if I'm correct, to step back from it.
Or treat it as a major variation.
Or treat it as a major variation if you wanted to come before zoning board for that. That gets a little into a more gray area. I don't want to speak about a case that's a hypothetical because, as you know, we determine.
Yeah.
But the idea is that a short span of a bay window would not cause an undue hardship to span that. If you're talking about a 40-foot wall and trying to shift weight back, that's a little different than maybe a 6-foot bay or something like that.
I wasn't thinking structurally as much as aesthetically.
Yeah.
Right.
So can I?
Well, one of the things, just, we do concern ourselves somewhat with aesthetics, but that's not really our purview.
Right.
Can I ask possibly Demir, what's the definition of a bay window? If there's a foundation that projects with the shape, is that a bay window or is a bay window something that is always hung?
In the past, you've seen bay windows that basically are projections, but as of late, these new construction homes do have foundation both for the chimney, that also used to be a projection, and also bay windows. It really depends.
Both are allowed inside of the.
Correct. And in essence, it is a bay window, and if it has a foundation or not, doesn't affect how that bay window looks like. And it's actually probably better for the home to be structurally sound if there is a foundation, so that's why that kind of includes that.
Can I ask one more question of Demir?
Yeah, keep going.
So if you say it's currently, what did you say, 4 to 6 weeks to go through the zoning board process, what is the timeline, knowing that you still need to go through the notification of neighbors and to do it administratively as a minor variation? Is there really time saved?
I would say the time saved is probably between 2 to 4 weeks. It depends on the timing of, what other applications we have out there. I mean, if we receive an application for a minor variance, I mean, if it is complete, we can go ahead and proceed with sending the notice to the property owners, and then we have to wait 10 days.
10 days.
So, and then right after the 10 days, we can kind of make a decision. Usually things are not that fast, and it kind of happens 3 to 4 weeks. With the ZBA, yeah, and with the Zoning Board of Appeals, there are 2 meetings a month, but with the notice requirements in the newspaper and the deadlines that we have to submit it to the newspaper, it simply cannot happen anything earlier than 4 to 5 weeks. And so it's most of the time, it's more than 6.
Also, one other thing, just to sort of add to that, is that we are required to have 4 concurrent votes for any decision that we make. So if something were to come to us and we were to have one member who missed a couple of meetings and we were standing at a 3-3 vote, that matter cannot be decided, because we always need 4 votes, either for something or against it, for us to make a determination.
Matt, in dealing with cases like this, I mean, I think our note said that you had 4 of these in some period of time. What is your experience with the neighbors?
Typically, we do not have problems with the neighbors on these. Like I said, this particular case, because of the way houses are situated in Evanston, sometimes you have a large yard on one side and a very small yard on the other. The areas in which we are seeing these types of things being requested for the most part are in residential R1, R2 type areas. So it's not like you have a large bulk on the lot, or I'm sorry, on the street or anything like that. Most of the time, I cannot speak with certainty, but I don't remember ever neighbors coming out to voice opposition to something like this.
Okay.
And we do look at what is similar along the street. So if there are a lot of 2-story homes along the street and you're the 1-story home, most neighbors kind of say, you know what, give them a 2-story home, because it kind of fits in better with the character of the neighborhood to have everything look a little more alike.
You just don't want to be the first one.
Right.
So I guess I didn't quite understand how the actual wording is changed and how it affects. So is this strictly limited to R1 and R2 zoning, or is it universally applicable throughout?
It's applicable to other zoning districts, but it applies only to single-family and 2-family uses. So if you had a 3-flat, it's not eligible to be a minor variance. So that would have to be a zoning board of appeals, or go to zoning board of appeals. So most of the time, single-family and 2-family dwellings are in R1 and R2 districts, as Mr. Rogers mentioned. So that's why we see those most of the time. And if I can add to one of the questions earlier about the comments from the neighbors, what we typically do on the staff's part is when something like this comes in front of us, we strongly encourage the applicant to reach out to surrounding property owners, and specifically to the ones that are mostly impacted, the adjacent property owners, to get their input, because they will get a notice from the city one way or the other. And what the applicant should not want is that the neighbor hears from the city first and not from the neighbor. And then they call us, try to figure out. And so it is in the interest of the applicant to reach out to the neighbor.
And quite often, we will ask if they have spoken with their neighbors as part of our findings.
Now, on a minor, you don't get the yard sign, do you?
No.
No.
Love the yard sign. Other questions? Questions for Matt? Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions for Demir? I see a light.
I have some questions about the language used for the amendment. I believe that some of the language can be maybe made more clear based upon our conversations, because specifically with respect to the phrase beginning in line 3 of paragraph 2, it reads, including yards in excess of a 35% variation. And what I'm understanding from our conversation today is that that is referring to nonconformities in excess of 35% of current requirements. And if that's the intention, I think it can be, that phrase could be redrafted,
To say it the way you said it.
say, including nonconformities in excess of 35% of requirements or current setback requirements, something like that, to make it clear that that's what that phrase is referencing.
Does that make sense?
It does, and we did have difficulties trying to phrase this in the best manner possible. And what often happens with these things is that what makes sense to us does not necessarily make sense to the regular property owners, and so we always have difficulties trying to interpret things that are written sort of in legal language, and so we really appreciate the feedback. So,
Or to the regular planning commissioners?
I'm a professional who has to read these things, and I didn't understand.
I apologize.
More, Peter? No. Okay. You've got that. Terry?
Are the words variance and variation interchangeable?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, does someone then want to offer a motion to approve the staff recommendation with the amendment to the ordinance language suggested by Commissioner Isaac?
I so move.
Commissioner Isaac, second. Lewis. This is going to the council, so we'll do this by roll call.
Commissioner Isaac,
Yay.
Commissioner Lewis, Commissioner Belisle,
Yep.
Commissioner Dubin,
Yay.
Commissioner Goddard, Chairman Ford.
Aye. 6
Passes.
ayes, no nays, the motion passes. Thank you all. Thank you, Matt. Enjoy your newfound freedom.
Shorter meetings?
Let's see. Do we have other business that we need to do?
No, nothing from staff.
Nothing to catch us up on?
Nothing. I mean, I'll point out to the discussion on the affordable housing or the possible changes to the inclusionary housing ordinance, which is basically the affordable housing. City currently has an affordable housing ordinance that is applicable to condominiums that was, I think, approved in 2009. Currently, there's some discussions to make some changes to that ordinance that would make it applicable to apartment projects. So that's something that I would encourage you to follow. There will be some workshops scheduled by the Planning and Development Committee, so if you have any interest, feel free to attend.
Anything else? Somebody want to move to adjourn? Lewis, second? Second. Goddard, all in favor? Opposed? None? We are adjourned. Thank you.